Hi guys, okay. I'm gonna do a quick video here just to go over the changes to the representation form that Texas Association of Realtors put out last Friday, August 23rd. So there's a handful of forms that have changed. I'm gonna go over the important, like super relevant ones to you guys right here, and I'm gonna show you the red lines. I went back and forth about what was the right version to show you because I know red lines can kind of make our eyes cross a little bit, but I think this is the right way to do it. So I'm gonna share my screen and we will go from there. Okay. So this is the residential real estate agreement that you're looking at. Obviously, this is a red line. You'll see the first change. So what a red line is, it takes the previous version and the new version and it runs them over and then it shows you the differences. So, the old version was June 24th, the new version is August 23rd. So this is the version you need to be using going forward. If you have a June 24th listing agreement already in place, you do not need to update it. You only need to update your listing agreements if they were before June 24th, which at this point is very old news, and you guys know that. So you don't need to update it. This is just use this form going forward. So nothing's changed on the first page. The primary changes are really in this compensation paragraph 5. And basically it's telling you, you have 5A, you're going to fill out if the seller is agreeing to offer some compensation to another broker. You have 5B, you're going to fill out if the seller is only offering to pay you compensation and isn't going to offer anything upfront to the other buyer. So you're always going to fill out either A or B, never both. And the changes that they made, they added this flat fee language everywhere, and that's kind of consistent through several of the documents. We're not even going to talk about that. But basically they added this sentence here that says, if 5A1 is what you fill in for, what your commission percentage is, 3%. And then in B, it's going to say, our administrative fee, $395. And then if this is an addition. If broker does not pay the other broker that procures a buyer as specified in 5A2, then broker's fee will be reduced by any amount not paid to the other broker. So this is a big change. And what it means is that if you have a listing agreement for 6%, 3% to you and 3% to the buyer's broker, and the buyer's broker only submits a compensation request for 2%, because that's what their buyer rep says. In the past, we kept 4% and as the listing broker, and that is what this line right here changes. That basically means that the seller is going to net the additional 1%, and we're still going to make this the 3% that was originally intended for us. So that's a big change, where buyers who ask for reduced compensation to their buyer's broker with the intention that the seller will net more, that is in fact what's going to happen now. So that's a big change. And then, this now says A2 is where we discuss like how much are we paying to the other broker, and this is where you're going to put, if the seller is offering 3%, you're going to put 3% here. No flat fees over here. And then here, sub-agency is always 0, right? Like we don't do sub-agency. And then, this clarifies paragraph 3 is new, 5A3 is new, and it just says the seller is authorized. No, sorry. It says that the listing agent is allowed to promote that the seller has agreed to offer this much. So it just clarified that. That was probably unnecessary, but it helps just to say like, yep, if you told me to put 3% in that blank, that's what I can advertise. I can put on my website, what have you. It just can't go in the MLS, right? And then paragraph 4 also clarifies the situation where if there's not another broker involved in that it's an intermediary situation, or it is a non-represented buyer, then the listing broker does get to keep it all, because presumably either whatever we had offered to the other broker is going to go to pay the intermediary with appointment if there's another Briggs Freeman agent involved, or if it's a non-represented buyer, then the listing agent is doing more work and they deserve that compensation as well. So the language itself says broker will retain amount specified in 5A1, the full amount, if there is no other broker that procures the buyer including but not limited to, intermediary situations or unrepresented buyer situations. And then amount specified in 5A2, which is the amount that would go to the other broker, will be applied towards any fee a buyer has agreed to pay a broker as specified in a separate written representation agreement. So that's just kind of restating where we are there. So those are, this is a change that the seller is going to keep any difference between what they've offered the buyer's broker and what the buyer broker actually asks for if they're offering more than what the buyer's broker asks for. So this part is a change in the bottom of one, and then these two are just clarifications. We had told you guys that in an intermediary situation, you need to just go ahead and fill out all the paperwork as if it were a different broker, and you actually don't have to do that anymore. And we'll talk about that next. So I just wanted to point that out. The other change in here is that, remember we used to talk about paragraph 11F, and it was like kind of a separate paragraph in the middle of the listing agreement that says, and this is what it says. This is 11F language just moved up here to sit with the rest of the commission discussion in the listing agreement, which is where it belongs and which makes sense. So this isn't a change, it's just moved in a good way. So seller does or does not authorize broker to disclose to other brokers and prospective buyers that they will consider contributing amount towards buyers' expenses, such as buyers' brokers' fees. So this is the box where we, 99.9% of the time, unless you have a seller who is adamant that he will never, ever, ever, ever contribute a penny towards buyer's cost to pay their broker. In that case, you would check they do not authorize you, but the grand majority of the time, like you do want to be authorized to discuss the fact that, with the right offer, my seller would be willing to pay buyer's brokers closing costs to cover broker's fees. So you do want to be authorized there. So you check that does box. Okay, so that's really the only other change you're going to see down here, that 11F went away, and that's because it just moved up. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the buyer tenant rep agreement and the changes. Their changes are not huge. This is the form. You can see it's the red line in the new version. Remember, we only use the long form, but you can make it narrow by just making it specific to a few properties. Even if you do make it specific to a few properties, normally I'd say your agreement should be at least six months to a year. If you want to make it narrow, then I would just make it for, 60 days. That if this buyer decides to write an offer on this house in the next 60 days, you will represent them. I wouldn't make it for just one day, because if you show up for them over the weekend and then they decide over the next week to make an offer, they're not obligated to work with you there. And you're the one that showed it to them. So, okay, they added the flat fee language, not a big deal. And then just pointing out here that they added a blank where we can put other compensation, which is where our administrative fee will go. And the rest of these changes are not huge. So I just wanted to point that out really quickly. The last document I want to go over is the addendum regarding broker's fees, which has changed, not substantially, but enough that we definitely need to go over it so you guys can see the difference. Again, I'll acknowledge that looking at red line does make my eyes cross a little bit, but I wanted you to be able to see what the distinctions were here. So I'm reviewing the red lines with you guys. Okay, so this is the addendum regarding broker's fees, new version. And you can say they added language here that says if you put an amount in here, it's for informational purposes only, and it does not change the compensation specified in the separate written compensation agreement. And we all know that in D1, this is the document that the compensation agreement between broker covers. So we hopefully get the compensation agreement between brokers signed, documenting whatever it is that the seller has already agreed to pay. If it's 3, if it's 2, whatever it is. You put that in here, 3%. We've signed that compensation agreement between brokers, and this goes here. It doesn't create a new obligation. It's just so that everyone can see and be on the same page, right? Because the listing broker and the buyer's broker are signing the compensation agreement, but the addendum regarding broker's fees is signed by the parties. So this is kind of an information document to some extent. Same thing here in D2. This is for sale by owners. And you would already have a compensation agreement between broker and owner signed at that point. Now where this comes in is where a new obligation comes in is where, and this says, it clarifies here, this creates a new obligation for the seller. This is the document, this is the blank you use, D2B, when you're asking the seller to make up the difference from what they're offering, which may be 0, it may be 3, it may be, who knows, versus what you as the buyer's agent have in your representation agreement. So if you have a 3% buyer's rep agreement and they agreed up front with their listing broker that they would offer 2, then you're going to put 2 in this blank right here, right? In D1, you're going to put 2% of the sales price. In D2B, you're going to put 1% to make up that and get you your full 3% paid, at closing through the listing broker and through the seller. And, this creates a new obligation. The 2% is not a new obligation because they agreed to it in the listing agreement, but asking them to pay that additional 1% to cover your full fee is a new obligation. So that all this blue language is just added to clarify. And then this paragraph regarding intermediary broker is also added. And you, like I said originally, you don't need any additional documentation if it's intermediary, and the listing agreement covers what the buyer's broker says. So if we have a listing agreement that says 3% to listing agent, 3% to buyer's agent, and it's an intermediary deal with appointment, and the buyer's rep says 3% also, you are covered. You don't really need to do anything else. You may want to send an email to the other agent and just confirm so that you have some type of writing, but really, as far as the seller goes, it's not necessary. You only need to use this blank E if it's a situation where we had a 5% listing agreement where the listing broker is making 3, the buyer's broker is being offered 2, and our Briggs Freeman buyer's rep says 3. So we're going to ask them to pay that additional 1% right in this blank here. And that's what that does. This is basically D2B for intermediary situations. It's just clarifying that the seller, they'd already agreed to pay some, but in this intermediary situation, we're actually asking you to pay us, the listing broker, a little bit more to cover the buyer broker's full fee. So that's how that works. That's all that it is. Those are the big changes. I hope this is helpful and not confusing. If it is confusing, call me. We can talk through any situation. Please keep coming to the classes. I feel like maybe we're beating a dead horse, but I also feel like there's still a lot of you guys that haven't taken them. And also every discussion we have is different and helpful and new. And every discussion we have, we're that farther into more experiences and you guys having better knowledge of kind of how this is going down. So hope that helps. If you guys have questions, just let me or your managers know. Thanks so much. Bye.